All right. Good morning. I'd like to thank the organizers of OIS for inviting me here to speak today. As I said, I'm going to be talking about the retinal pharmaceuticals market, which basically means the anti-VEGF market. As mentioned, my name is Peter Downs. I'm a writer and analyst with MarketScope. And there are several things that are driving this market. One is the growing number of people living past age 80. Another is the growing population of people with diabetes and the earlier onset of diabetes, which increases the risk of developing DR during their lifetime. There's the extension of existing treatments to previously untreatable diseases or indications, such as the extension of anti-VEGF treatments from DME and PDR to NPDR. And there's the development of new therapies for untreated diseases, such as inherited retinal disorders. There we go. Additional drivers include efforts to reduce the burden of treatment with longer treatment intervals, regulation, of course, safety, and competition. So looking more closely at one particular driver here is treatment intervals. We survey retina specialists every quarter, and we have 3 columns here from across 2 years before COVID became a big issue in the US, and then 2021. All of these are from the first quarter of the noted year. So 2021, as we're learning to live with COVID. And let me see if this works here. All right, no, this is the pointer. So you see the steady increase in the proportion of patients who are on treat and extend, and in the proportion of patients in the bright green there who are on bi-monthly injection. That's mainly come at the expense of PRN. There's been a fairly steady proportion of patients on quarterly injection, and up and down, no clear trend on the number of patients on monthly injection. So some of the trends we're seeing as a result of these drivers, one is more competitors entering the market. There are now several producers of bevacizumabs that compounding pharmacies are using to package for IVT injections for retina. The first ranibizumab biosimilar was just approved last month, another one filed this month. And there are multiple firms developing biosimilars for aflibercept. So the concentrated market will become increasingly fractured as we move from 2 approved anti-VEGFs for retina disease to many. There's also the trend towards longer-acting drug delivery, both with devices such as the port delivery system, but also with drug formulations such as high-dose aflibercept and GB102. There are cost controls, which in some countries are formally mandated, and other countries are informal. There's still a lot of talk of adjunctive therapies to boost the effectiveness of primary therapies, though we really haven't seen anything effective come out of that yet. And there's the opening of new disease markets. So one of the trends that we follow closely are the sales prices of the drugs used in retina. These sale prices are all from Medicare's July drug ASP files for each of the years indicated. And I think of note here, you see Lucentis was introduced a little over $2,000 for injection for wet AMD. And that has ended up essentially being the ceiling price for anti-VEGFs in retina. So Lucentis roughly held that price for a few years, then started to decline. It's now at around $1,500 for an injection, so it's lost about 25% of its price. Eylea was introduced just below the price of Lucentis, has maintained that price for several years, but it has started to decline in price now. And Beovu on the right was introduced just below the previous year's price of Eylea. And so I think that's something we keep in mind there is overall, not just for specific drugs, but overall the cost of anti-VEGF drugs has been declining. Another trend we look at is the volume of injections, which increased pretty continuously up until 2019. There was a dip in 2020, as one might expect, but we're seeing it bounce back, and it looks on course to just exceed the level of injections in 2019 this year. So those are some of the things that go into our forecast. If you look at the bottom line, total revenues from Retina Pharmaceuticals, we're projecting an average 6% per year increase through 2026. So increasing from $7.6 billion this year to $10.2 billion in 2026. But that's spread differently over the subsectors of drugs. For branded ocular anti-VEGFs like Lucentis, Eylea, Beovu, we see a very, very small annual increase, largely due both to the falling drug price counteracting some of the increase from increasing number of injections, but also to the effect of biosimilars, which will be introduced in the US next year. And we expect will grow rapidly, mainly taking, the initial ones mainly taking market share from Lucentis, but also some from off-label cancer drugs like Avastin and Zaltrap. So we see the market for those drugs declining a little bit. Sustained delivery right now, Ozurdex and Iluvien we expect will shortly be joined by the port delivery system. And so that'll grow rapidly after that happens. And we're projecting the first full year of geographic atrophy therapy for 2025, going out on the limb on that one. But overall, it adds up then to a 6% annual increase for the total market. This just shows that the way some of the factors push prices down or revenues down, while some factors push revenues up. Those pushing down, of course, are competition, biosimilars, IVD cancer drugs, cost controls, and new products. Those pushing revenues up. Growing population of elderly, rising disease rates, rising income, so people can afford something other than the cheapest option. New products and new treatments for previously untreated diseases. Take a closer look at some of those, the factors depressing market revenues. The big one is competition. So a couple of years ago, there were only 2 competitors in terms of manufacturers in the anti-VEGF market in the US. When Novartis introduced Beovu, that made it 3. When Biogen launches its biosimilar next year, that'll make it 4. There are 2 more biosimilars, kind of hot on their heels, as well as the potential for an ophthalmic bevacizumab, raise it to 7. If a couple of these companies with drugs in phase 3 right now are successful, they're bringing to market. By the end of our work in 5 years, we could have 10 or more manufacturers competing in the space. In biosimilars, there are currently 2 Avastin biosimilars that we know of that compounding pharmacies are marketing as alternatives to Avastin for IVT injection in retina therapy. When the ophthalmic bevacizumab comes on the market, we think in the market, it'll occupy the space of a biosimilar for Avastin, maybe a biosimilar plus. Lucentis, as I said, there's one has been approved, another has already filed in the US, and a third is hot on its heels. Eylea, there are 7 companies that we know of that are developing biosimilars for Eylea. Of course, IVT cancer drugs have been around for a while. Cost controls in the US are exercised mainly through access to insurance company formularies, step therapy, and the potential, I don't know how real, but the potential that Medicare could begin negotiating drug prices. And with new products, if new products come online that are competitively priced with existing anti-VEGFs, but offer a longer interval of efficacy, then that reduces the number of injections per patient, which reduces the revenue per patient that they generate. In terms of increasing market revenue, of course, the elderly population we see growing at an average of 2.8% a year. Disease rates are growing. DR is growing at an average of 3.1% a year. Rising incomes, as I mentioned, help people pay more for therapies. The new products that could reduce the burden of disease, such as extending the interval, could also increase revenues by increasing the accessibility. There are more people who can accept that burden of treatment and access treatment, as well as perhaps new drug delivery methods may make it more accessible. And then there's treatments for previously untreated disease, and the big one in our window is geographic atrophy. So some of the key forecast components then that went into that forecast are the number of people with retinal disease, particularly the number with vision-threatening retinal disease, the treatment rates for different diseases, the frequency of treatment, the type of therapy, steroid, anti-VEGF, and which one, and the price of the therapy. We take the information that becomes available in the past, feed into our model to calibrate with past years in order to facilitate projections for future years. With new products, we have to make some assumptions. With faricimab, for example, we think it will be priced under the ceiling price that we've seen for other anti-VEGFs. We expect it to mainly cannibalize sales from existing products or take a larger share of new patients. The port delivery system, there will, of course, be a price for the device, but the drug refill price, we think, will be constrained by that ceiling price and how its effectiveness compares with the competitors that are injected. We see it mainly cannibalizing sales from Lucentis, monthly IVT injection. Biosimilars, looking at where biosimilars have been introduced, both geographically around the world and in other markets in the US. We expect the first one to be priced at around 80% of the reference product. Once you get several, you get 3 or more in the market, typically the price drops 40 to 60% from what the price of the reference product was. When there's treatment for GA, if it is an IVT injection, we think it will appeal first to patients who have both GA and wet AMD and are already receiving injections for wet AMD. I think initially it will have a similar growth path to the initial introduction of anti-VEGF treatment, would be Lucentis. Expected to be priced below branded anti-VEGFs because it's not as effective. So how that affects our market projection. The blue columns represent what the market would be for just current products going forward. The gray columns on the right, those are new products, not including biosimilars. So this chart does not include biosimilars. And then so the green is the sum of the two, showing that most of the growth we project for the next 5 years are likely to come from new products on the market. Of course, there are technologies that could completely disrupt our projections and the retinal market. For example, a treatment for GA that reverses disease damage would be huge, and its market potential would be very different from a treatment that is only slowing progression. Effective topical drug delivery or effective oral drug delivery would really upend the whole model of how treatment is delivered and really the accessibility to treatment and perhaps patients' willingness to take it. We're aware of 13 companies working on topical drug delivery. Oculus is probably in the lead, and 18 companies working on oral drug delivery, of which Alkeus is probably furthest along. And then an effective non-specific gene therapy, something that could you're not just a gene therapy that apply to many different genetic diseases. You know, a lot of companies are working on that, but also gene therapy that might apply to a disease like wet AMD, where there may be many different genetic factors involved. That, again, would completely rework the retinal market. So these are all elements that go into our report, our 2021 Retinal Pharmaceuticals Market Report, which is global analysis from 2020 to 2026. You can learn more about this by going to marketscope.com/OIS Retina. So thank you for your attention, and there's my email address if you wish to contact me.